What's up, high school students? Listen, everybody loves a good story. And maybe for you, maybe growing up there was a particular storybook that you love to read or have read to you, or maybe it's a movie or a book that you love. And I would guarantee that part of the reason why you love it so much is because of the story it tells. Maybe it's just engaging for you, maybe it's relatable, maybe it's just memorable, but for some reason that story sticks with you. Listen, you and I were created and wired to love stories, and Jesus himself was the greatest storyteller. Many times in his own life and ministry, instead of teaching to people or simply telling people what to do, he chose to tell them a story that they could relate to and engage with, and within the story was a point or a truth that he wanted them to remember. And those stories that Jesus told, we refer to as parables. And as we kick off this series, Storyteller, we want to look at some of the most memorable and impactful stories that Jesus told. And as we jump into this first story, it's quite a memorable one, and you might have heard it before. But before we jump into the story, it's important to remember that Jesus told this story to a real group of people. And the person who recorded this moment in the life of Jesus, Luke, who is one of his followers, wanted us to see a few things before he jumped right into the story. And here's what I want you to see. Look at what Luke wanted us to notice. He said, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. Luke wanted us to see who was in the crowd. And he says that there were tax collectors who no one really liked, and there were sinners who were present. And not only sinners, but notorious sinners, those who were notorious and well known for the mistakes that they make or have made in the past. There's another group of people who are also in the crowd, and Luke will tell us that they are the good people or the religious people, the ones who feel like they make the right choices all the time. And they're not really happy that Jesus lets these bad people follow him wherever he goes. And it's into this group of people he begins to tell the story, and look at what Jesus said. He said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate." So he divided the property between them. Essentially, this younger brother is saying to the father, "Father, when you die, you're going to leave some of your stuff and your money and your belongings for me." And he says, "Well, Dad, I want that stuff now." And for some reason, this crazy request, the father says yes. And so he divides half of his things and he gives it to the son. And Jesus goes on, he says, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Essentially, it's like somebody who wins the lottery and has all of this money suddenly and doesn't have good money management. And so they waste it. They spend it on extravagant things and purchases, and they don't manage it well. And before they know it, it's gone. And that's exactly what happens in this story that Jesus is telling. And he tells us that this younger son has wasted it all on wild living. Look at what Jesus says next. He said, after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed his pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. The son went from being incredibly rich to poor, from having everything to nothing. And it says that he's hungry. He has nothing to feed himself. It says that he's envying the pigs and what they're eating, and he simply wants some food, and he's willing to eat what the pigs are eating. Jesus goes on and he says, when the younger son came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. The boy understood that the father's servants lived better than he did. So he decides, I'm going to go home. I'm going to apologize to my father, and I'm going to tell my father, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, I'm not worthy to be your son. Please allow me to work for you, to be one of your servants." And if you were in the audience, in that group of people I described earlier, listening to this story as Jesus was telling it, you probably thought you knew what was about to happen. And yet Jesus tells a different story. Look at what happened next. He said, "But while the younger son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. As soon as the son came into view, it says that the father doesn't yell. He's not upset. He's not mad. It says that he runs to his son who has been gone. He embraces him and he kisses him and he welcomes him. And look at what happens next. The son says, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found,' so they began to celebrate." The son expected to come home ashamed and to be in trouble and to be forced to be a servant, and yet that's not at all what happened. It says that his father wasn't interested in that, and he simply welcomed his son with open arms and was glad that he was home. And this is a powerful story that Jesus told, and the crowd who was listening to the story definitely did not expect this twist. And Jesus would even describe in the story that the older brother was upset as well. He asked his father, "Father, why are you celebrating our younger brother? He wasted away your wealth. He made bad and poor choices, and I have been here the whole time and have listened to you and have kept your wealth intact." The crowd expected the point of the story to be that you get what you deserve, but that was not the point of the story. The point of Jesus' story was this, that you don't have to be fixed in order to be found. That it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter the mistakes that you've made or how far you feel from God. You do not need to be fixed before you can come back to God. That the son who, in the middle of his shame and mistakes and regrets, came home to the Father, and God, in the story, welcomed him home with open arms and celebrated that his son who was lost is now found and who was dead is now alive. That was the point of the story. And this is a great reminder for you and me, for those of us who feel like we've made major mistakes in our life, or we feel like we're too far from God. The point of the story is meant to remind us that you are not too far from God, that you are not too far gone, and that Jesus will never give up on you. And so the question today is this, students: who do you feel like you relate to most in this story? If you feel like you relate to the older brother and you seem to make the right choices, but you can see the people around you who you would consider to be the sinners or the bad people or those who are notorious for their bad mistakes, the point of this story is this. We're meant to ask ourselves, if Jesus doesn't think that people need to be fixed in order to be found and to come home, why do we? Why do we feel like that those people that we see in our lives that make bad choices, why do we feel like they are too far gone? That they would never step into church, that they would never come to small group, that Jesus is just done with them. The point of the story is meant to remind us that even them, that God wants to use us to love and reach them, and that they simply need to turn around, come home, and like that, Jesus is willing to celebrate them and to give them new life. Maybe you feel like you can relate most to the younger brother, the one who makes the bad choices, who makes the mistakes and has regrets in their life. And if that's you, Jesus wants you to remember this, that you may have lost your way, but you haven't lost your worth. That no matter what you've done or the mistakes you've made, you still have worth and value to the Father and to Jesus. And so ultimately, students, here's what I want you to see. You can go to God and come to God just as you are, and you and I can also help others to do the same, regardless of what they have done. And so whatever you're feeling today, students, I just hope you see this, that you can come to God, and the people in your life who you feel like are too far gone really aren't, and maybe God wants you to begin to reach out to them.